Tractate Mikvaos, General Introduction. But a spring and a pit of gathered water shall be tahor. Vayikra, chapter 11, verse 36. This verse is the source of the laws of mikvah, literally gathered, plural, mikvaos, which is a pool in which ritual immersion takes place. The simple meaning of the verse is that a spring and a pit of gathered water cannot become tameh, even if someone or something tameh touches them. This, in fact, is a basic feature of mikvah, that its water cannot become tameh. This is in contrast to water that is in a container, rather than in a pit in the ground, which can become tameh, as the Torah states there earlier. A second feature of mikvah is that a person or article that became tameh will become tahor when immersed in a mikvah. The main topic of this tractate is the validity of mikvaos. The final chapter addresses the laws of immersion, tevilah, and a mikvah, focusing on what is considered a hatzitza, separation between the body and the water of the mikvah. Part 1. The requirement of immersion, tevilah, in a mikvah. A. Purification from tumah. A person who is tameh may not enter the Beis Hamikdash, eat terumah, meiser sheni, or kodashim foods without tevilah in a mikvah. Similarly, a person or object that is tameh may not touch such foods without first immersing in a mikvah. Nowadays, this tevilah is not relevant. B. Nida Zava. A woman who is a Nida, Zava, or who has given birth may not have marital relations without going through a purification process that concludes with tevilah in a mikvah. This is the primary use of a mikvah nowadays. C. Converts. A convert to the Jewish faith requires tevilah in a mikvah as part of the conversion process. D. Food utensils. By biblical law, types of metalware used with food require tevilah after being acquired from an idolater. The rabbis extended the requirement to include glassware as well. This tevilah applies nowadays as well. E. Tevilas Ezra, the immersion instituted by Ezra. Ezra described and enacted that a man who had a seminal omission must immerse himself in a mikvah before Torah study or prayer, Bava Kama 82a and 82b. For the purposes of this tevilah, a mikvah consisting of she'uvin, drawn water, see below section 4, is adequate. At times, even pouring water on the person who is tameh suffices. See chapter 3, Mishnah 4 with note 2. Ezra's enactment was later annulled since it was difficult to keep. Nevertheless, many pious people still comply with it. Or Chaim 88 and Mishnah Brura there. Section 2, Mikvah and Mayan. The Torah specifies two types of water that are valid for immersion. 1. A pit of gathered water, a mikvah, and 2. A spring, a Mayan. A. Mikvah. In its strict sense, the word mikvah refers to a pool of water that is not connected to a spring. For a mikvah to be valid, a number of conditions are required. For example, it must contain a minimum of 40 sa of rainwater, and its water must be standing still, not flowing. The required conditions will be detailed in section 3. B. Mayan, a spring. A pool or stream that is fed by a spring is considered a mayan, as long as it is connected to its source, the spring. Unlike a mikvah, a mayan containing even a small amount of water is valid for tevilah, as long as the item being immersed will be completely covered by the water. In addition, a mayan is valid for tevilah even when it is flowing. With regard to certain laws, the Torah requires mayim chaim, that is, flowing, literally living water. For example, a zav, a man who had a certain type of discharge, must immerse himself in mayim chaim in order to become tahor. See Vayikra chapter 15, verse 13. Although a mayan generally qualifies as mayim chaim, there are a number of situations where it does not qualify as mayim chaim. An example of this is a spring whose water is salty or warm. See chapter 1, Mishnah 8, and also chapter 5, Mishnah 1. Section 3, Validity of a mikvah. For a mikvah of gathered water to be valid, 6 conditions must be fulfilled. It must contain A, at least 40 sa, B, of water, C, that is on the ground, D, is not flowing, E, has not been in a container, she'uvin, and F, has been formed through tahara. We will now discuss each of these. A. 40 sa. A mikvah must contain at least 40 sa of rainwater, 360 to 720 liters. This is equivalent to between 100 and 200 gallons, according to the various authorities. The custom is to use at least 200 gallons, and often much more is used. This is equal to 3 cubic amos, i.e. 1 by 1 by 3 amos. For tevilah of a person, 40 sa are required by biblical law. However, for tevilah of tameh utensils, it is required by rabbinic law only. See Rashi Pesachim 17b. B. Water. A mikvah must be made up of water, not other liquids. Furthermore, water that is colored with dye or juice is not valid. See chapter 7, Mishnahs 3 and 4. This law is derived from the wording of the above verse, a spring and a pit of gathered water shall be tahor. The Torah speaks specifically of water, which implies water in its natural clear state, Toras Kohanim. C. On the ground. A mikveh must be in or on the ground. It may also be part of a building attached to the ground. A tub or any type of container cannot serve as a mikveh. By the same token, a mikveh may not be in midair. Therefore, tevilah cannot be performed in an unattached wave that is thrown out of the sea. See Chagiga 19a and Yordea 201:5. D. Gathered water. The Torah speaks of a pit of gathered water. Gathered means water that is not flowing. See Rosh Nadarim 40a. E. She'uven, drawn water. A mikveh must consist of water that collects on the ground by natural means. Water in a container is known as maim she'uven, literally drawn water, or simply she'uven, and is not fit for a mikveh even after the water is removed from the container. The particulars of she'uven will be discussed further in section 4. Formation through tahara. The water must not be channeled to the mikveh by anything that can become tameh, e.g. a utensil or person, even if they are presently tahor. Thus, if a stream of water was directed into a mikveh by a utensil or by a person's hand or foot, the mikveh is disqualified on account of formation through tuma. Section 4. She'uven, drawn water. In the above verse, water gathered in a pit is mentioned alongside water of a spring. This teaches that the water in the pit must possess similar qualities to a pool of spring water. Just as a pool of spring water forms naturally made by heaven without human involvement, so too the water in the pit must accumulate naturally without any human involvement. Water that goes into a container with a person's consent, see below section A1e, has been subject to a level of human involvement and is therefore disqualified for a mikveh, see Toras Kohanim, quoted by Rav to Mishnah, chapter 2, Mishnah 3. Much of the discussion of this tractate involves around the laws of she'uven. The disqualification of she'uven applies to a mikveh containing less than 40 sa of rainwater. Once a mikveh contains 40 sa of rainwater, an unlimited amount of she'uven may be added. A. Types of she'uven. She'uven by a container. 1. She'uven by a container. Water that is in a container becomes she'uven and is not fit for mikveh, even after it is removed from the container. The contents of a container become she'uven only when all of the following specifications are met. A receptacle. It is a container capable of holding water as opposed to a flat board. See chapter 6, Mishnah 2. If the container has a hole, it may no longer be considered a container. See chapter 4, Mishnah 5. B. Made for receiving. The container is designed for something to settle in it and stay there. See chapter 4, Mishnah 3. C. Standing in its manner of receiving. The container is standing upright in a position in which water can remain there and not spill out. See the end of chapter 4, Mishnah 2. Detached. The container is formed in material that is not attached to the ground. If, however, it is formed in a stone that is connected to the ground, it is like a hole in the ground whose contents do not become she'uven. See chapter 4, Mishnah 5. E. Became filled willingly. The owner intends that the container should fill with water. If it fills against his will, the water does not become she'uven. See chapter 4, Mishnah 1. 2. Water that flows out of something that is held in a person's hand becomes she'uven even though the water was never in a container. For example, if someone wrings out a garment, the water that flows out is disqualified even though the garment is not considered a container through being held in a person's hands. See chapter 3, Mishnah 3, and Shach and Yordea. Throughout this tractate, whenever we speak of rainwater in contrast to she'uven, we mean natural water, which does not become she'uven by being collected in a container or in a person's hand. B. Disqualifying a mikveh. Besides the law that the 40 sa'ah of a mikveh may not be made up of a she'uven, the rabbis decreed that even if 3 lugan, approximately 1 to 2 quarts or liters, of she'uven enter into less than 40 sa'ah of rainwater, all of the rainwater becomes disqualified from further use for a mikveh, and remains disqualified no matter how much rainwater goes in afterward. This law was enacted as a safeguard against forming half of a mikveh or more out of she'uven. Alternatively, this could lead to a mikveh being made in a container, e.g. a tub, which is not allowed by biblical law. See above, section 3c. Tosfos Yom Tov to Mishnah, chapter 2, Mishnah 3. C. Making she'uven valid. There are certain circumstances where she'uven can be made fit for use in a mikveh as follows. 1. Hamshacha. 3 lugin of she'uven disqualify mikveh only when they are poured directly into the mikveh. If, however, the she'uven water was poured out at a distance and then flowed over the ground to the mikveh, the water loses its previous nature of she'uven and the mikveh is valid. See Yorodea 201:44. This is known as Hamshacha. Hamshacha is effective only if the mikveh consists of a majority of rainwater, and Hamshacha is being used for the remaining smaller part. Thus, for example, a mikveh containing 21 sa'ah of rainwater can be completed with the addition of 19 sa'ah of she'uven water through Hamshacha. See Yorodea Lockstick. Shulchan Aruch Yorodea 201:45-46 rules that the Hamshacha must extend over a distance of at least 3 tefachim, handbreadths, over the ground or through a pipe that is not a utensil. Ramah adds that initially it should be done over ground, that is somewhat absorbent, rather than over a stone floor. 2. Hashaka. The disqualification of she'uven can also be removed if the water is connected to a mikveh containing at least 40 sa'ah of rainwater. See below, section 5c. Section 5. Hashaka, connection. With regard to a number of laws, when water is connected to the water of a mikveh, it is given the halachic status of the water in the mikveh. This is known as hashaka, literally kissing. Rambam commentary to Horus 8:9. There are a number of applications of this principle. A. For tameh water. Generally, foods and liquids that become tameh cannot be made tahor. Tameh water is an exception. A container of tameh water can be made tahor by allowing the tameh water to touch the water of the mikveh through an opening in the container. See chapter 10, Mishnah 6. This is not because of tevilah, which is effective only for people and utensils. Rather, it is based on a principle known as zeraya, planting. See Rashi Tanita 17a and Rav Tabetza 2:3. That is, if tameh seeds are planted in the ground, they lose their independent identity and are considered part of the ground, which is tahor. Similarly, when the tameh water mingles with the water of the mikveh, it is considered part of the mikveh and becomes tahor. See Psachim 34b. B. For a mikveh lacking 40 sa'ah. A mikveh that is made up of valid rainwater but lacks the required 40 sa'ah can be made valid by connecting it to a complete valid mikveh containing 40 sa'ah. The connection has the effect of combining the two mikvaos. Furthermore, if a pool containing less than 40 sa'ah of rainwater is next to another pool containing less than 40 sa'ah of rainwater, the pools can be connected to form a complete valid mikveh containing 40 sa'ah. See, okay. Then tevilah can be performed in either pool. C. For she'uven. Water that is she'uven can be made valid by connecting it to a mikveh containing at least 40 sa'ah of rainwater. Thus, if there are two pools next to each other, one containing rainwater and the other she'uven, and they were connected through a hole in the dividing wall or an indentation at the top of the wall, the she'uven becomes valid and may be used for tevilah. See Mishnah's chapter 6, Mishnah 3, and chapter 6, Mishnah 8. If the she'uven water does not merely touch the rainwater at one point, but is actually added into the rainwater, it certainly becomes validated. Thus, if one adds she'uven to a valid pool of rainwater, causing it to overflow over a wall or through a hole, the water that overflows is valid to form another mikveh. Commonly, a mikveh containing she'uven that has been validated through the first approach by being connected to a valid mikveh is known as being validated through hashaka, while a mikveh that is validated through the second approach, overflowing water, is known as being validated through zeriyah. An elaboration on the design of contemporary Mikvaos appears at the end of this volume. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel, like streams spread out. Bamidbar chapter 24, verses 5 and 6. The tents of Jacob are the houses of worship, and the dwelling places of Israel are the houses of study. See Midrash Lekach Tov. Why are streams mentioned along with the houses of worship and houses of study? It is to teach that just as a person goes into a stream Tameh and comes out Tahor, so too a person enters the house of worship or the house of study Tameh and comes out Tahor. See the Midrash. May it be the will of Hashem that through the study of Tractate Mikvaos, we merit the coming of Mashiach and the ability to fulfill the laws of Tuma and Tahara in our land.